Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my wide receiver rankings for Week 10. I'm intended for half PPR leagues on this channel, but if you have any questions, let me know in the comment section. I'll always be happy to answer them. Before we get going, I always bring you the players I didn't rank at the position due to bye and injury, and holy shit, the position is decimated this week. There's 4 teams on bye. So the Browns with Cedric Tillman, Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, can't start them. The Seahawks with DK Metcalf, JSN, and Tyler Lockett, can't start them either. The Packers on bye with Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, and Dontavian Wicks. They're unranked. And then the Raiders with Jacoby Myers and, oh no, Trey Tucker's unavailable this week. They're unranked as well. But more players just go down every week at this position. Chris Olave is out with a pretty gruesome concussion. That was scary. So he's out this week. He's unranked. So is Mike Evans, who I think will be out one more week with that hamstring injury. Adam Thielen may come back for the Germany game, but at the moment, I still have him unranked on IR. Brandon Cooks on IR. Josh Reynolds on IR. Bub Means goes to IR as well. Alan Lazard placed on IR. Juju Smith-Schuster questionable, may play, may not ranked at the moment. DJ Chark yet to make his debut, also unranked. And T. Higgins plays on Thursday night. He missed 2 straight games. I have him unranked at the moment. I also do not rank Amari Cooper at the moment. I'm not quite sure if he'll play, but that's not it. There's also Stephon Diggs on IR, Christian Kirk, Chris Godwin, Brandon Ayuk, Rashid Shaheed, Rashee Rice, and Marquise Brown all on IR, all out for the year. So holy shit, there are so many players you can't rank, and I think running back has the best flex options this week. There's a lot of good plays. You can hit running back like 23 and still think you're getting 16 plus points. Running back safer in week 10. But let's get going with number 1. I have Ja'Marr Chase at Baltimore, who should be the best receiver this week. He definitely was in week 5 versus the Ravens. 36 points, 12 targets, 10 catches, 193 yards, and 2 touchdowns, especially with T. Higgins probably not ready to suit up just yet. I expect more of the same. Ja'Marr will be elite. This is the number 1 matchup for opposing receivers. The Ravens give up 42 points per game in their last 5, 218 yards per game with 10 touchdowns. Ja'Marr will dominate. He is a lock in your lineup. Number 2, Nico Collins, thankfully, comes back from IR. I do expect that to happen. Versus Detroit on Sunday night primetime, he will be one of the best plays overall. If you look at his last 4 games, he's actually the number 1 receiver in points per game. 19 points on 9.3 targets, 6.5 catches, 113 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He is the go-to target for CJ Stroud, who's definitely missed him the last month without him on the field. The offense has not quite been the same in the passing game. So love Nico Collins this week. He gets a top 6 matchup against Detroit, who in the last 5 games allow 32.2 points per game to the position. Only 2 touchdowns. It's hard to score touchdowns at receiver against the Lions, but they've also allowed 213 yards per game. Nico will definitely go over 100. I think he's one of the best options this week. I almost put him at number 1 before I looked into the numbers for Ja'Marr. So Nico Collins, happy to have him back. He is a problem on Sunday. Number 3, I have Justin Jefferson at Jacksonville, who's the top 6 receiver in the last 4 games, averaging 15.7 points per game. The volume has been ticking up lately along with the yards. He's now officially over 100 yards on average in his last 4. He put up about 130 last week. So even with only 1 touchdown last 4 games, Jefferson's lights out, definitely a trustworthy option. And against Jacksonville, a top 11 matchup, he will dominate. They've given up 6 touchdowns to wide receivers over the last 5 weeks. So love Jefferson. No one's ever benching him. He is a stud every single week. At number 4, I'm going with Garrett Wilson at Arizona, who has put up the highlight of the season. What an insane one-handed catch for a touchdown last week. It was his 2nd of that game. So Garrett Wilson looking like an elite option. He's the wide receiver 2 in points per game in his last 4 games. 17.2 is better than guys like Ja'Marr and Jefferson. So he's been on fire. 9.3 targets, 6.8 catches, 93 yards, and 3 touchdowns over the last 4 weeks. Garrett Wilson is an elite option. So have to keep rolling him out there. Love his upside. He's a must start rest of year. Number 5, I got Amon-Ra St. Brown at Houston, who is on fire. It's insane what he's been able to do over the last 6 weeks. The Sun God has 35 targets, 34 catches, 322 yards, and 6 touchdowns over the last 6 weeks. The yards are not like insane. The volume could be better, but the catch percentage is elite. And he also has 6 touchdowns in 6 straight games. He is money in the bank. If you throw him the ball, he is not going to drop it. He has not done that in 5 straight games. And in 6, he has found the end zone. So love the floor for St. Brown. While the volume could be higher, only 5.3 targets in his last 4 matchups, I'm still not complaining. St. Brown is fantastic. He also gets a top 10 matchup this week. On Sunday night primetime, the Texans will not stop him. They just gave up 3 touchdowns to Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams, 8 touchdowns to receivers over the last 5 weeks. So St. Brown will dominate. I definitely trust him. He is a guarantee to give you at least 5 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown. Love that floor. You know the ceiling will come back. I have no concerns long term for St. Brown. His volume has decreased about 30% from last year, and it probably fixes itself. I don't expect less than 140 targets for St. Brown on the season. So right now he's on pace for 125. It will tick up. I have no concerns with Amon-Ra St. Brown. At number 6, I have CeeDee Lamb versus Philly, who is questionable dealing with a shoulder injury and looked like he was in legitimate pain last week against the Falcons. But it looks like Cooper Rush will get the start for at least a couple weeks. Dak Prescott is out with a hamstring injury. So I'm more concerned about the quarterback downgrade than the pain tolerance for CeeDee Lamb. It sounds like he will suit up, but he is week to week at the moment. So there's a chance he doesn't play, but I do expect him on the field, and the volume won't change. I still think Cooper Rush will get him 10 plus targets no matter what. It should be fine for Lamb. But the matchup against the Eagles actually ranks bottom 10. They have stepped it up lately, but he should be fine. I'm not worried. CeeDee Lamb's still an elite option. As long as he's healthy on the field, he is a must start, but downgraded him to number 6 because there's no Dak Prescott alongside him. Number 7, I got A.J. Brown at Dallas in the same matchup, and A.J. Brown only played 47% of snaps last week with a knee injury, so that's not great. It would be his 2nd injury of the season, and that's not a trend you like to see. So he's not a guarantee to play. I want to monitor his status, but odds are he suits up, and injuries have really been the only thing that's slowed him down overall this year. So in his last 4 games against the Cowboys, he's averaging 14.7 points on just under 10 targets, under 7 catches, 83 yards, 2 touchdowns. He'll be fine. I'm not worried about him. I would still rather have A.J. Brown than Devonta Smith. So although he has not found the end zone in the last 2 games, I'm not worried about it. As long as he's healthy, A.J. Brown remains a top 10 play. At number 8, I got Zay Flowers versus Cincinnati, and Flowers has over 100 yards in 4 of the last 6 games. In the other 2 games, he has a maximum of 11 yards. So when he busts bad. So that's what I'm worried about. There's always a little risk, but if you have such high production when that doesn't happen, those bad games feel like the outliers and not what I'm going to expect. I'm going to trust Flowers in my lineup. You'd feel a lot worse benching him if he goes off for 100 yards again than starting him and only getting 2 points. So the risk of that happening is minimal, but it is possible. I'm willing to overlook that risk and still recommend he's a must start at this point. With 100 yards in 4 out of the last 5 games, there's no way you're benching Zay Flowers. In week 5, he had 120 yards total from scrimmage, 12 targets, 1 rush attempt, 7 catches, no touchdown, but still a very high floor. He's averaging 102 yards over his last 4 games. So still trusting Flowers, definitely starting him. He is now a lock in your lineup. Fire him up no matter what. At number 9, I have Terry McLaurin versus Pittsburgh, who even in a bad game where he only sees 3 targets, Terry McLaurin still scores 2 touchdowns and gives you 14.9 fantasy points in half PPR. So he's averaging 15.8 the last month. He is money in the bank. The touchdowns are happening like crazy. I'm giving him my complete faith. I just don't expect a bad game from Terry ever again, as long as Jaden Daniels is the quarterback. This is karma for all of those years where he had terrible quarterback play in Washington. Terry's finally having the season we all know he deserves. It's been a while, but his rookie year, we thought he could maybe be a top 12 receiver. Now he officially is. Terry McLaurin, a must start rest of season. At number 10, I got Tyreek Hill at the Rams, and Tua is limited. There are some limitations with the quarterback play. That's just the problem in Miami. I think the concern for another concussion has McDaniels calling plays that have a very quick release time, that are very close to the line of scrimmage, and a lot of checkdowns, especially to Devon Chain. When they get in close, they prefer running backs punch it in rather than receivers. So that's the big problem for Tyreek. The touchdowns are not hitting, but in his last 4 games with Tua averaging 8 targets per game, that's kind of all you can ask for. It is disappointing. You expected an elite option when you drafted him. He's no longer that top 3 player, but still, I think Tyreek does deserve to be started. I would still keep him in the lineup. It would feel kind of weird to bench him because inevitably he will go off. He will have well over 15 points sooner or later. So I do still want to start Tyreek Hill. I worry about this offense a little bit in general, but the matchup against the Rams is not bad. In prime time, they probably showcase him a little bit more, and odds are he gets a touchdown celebration this week. So I would still keep starting Tyreek. 8 targets is enough not to panic. But the yardage is kind of the only thing that's saving you. Touchdowns are not guaranteed. At number 11, I have Drake London at New Orleans, who is questionable, dealing with a hip injury, did exit last week's game, but not before he scored a touchdown. So that's emblematic of what you get from London this season. Even if he doesn't play more than a quarter, you can still crack 9+ points with London. So he's been very good this season. In his last 5 games, I'm going to give him a 5-game sample size because last week was not a full game. If you look at that, 16 points per game is his average with 4 touchdowns, 70 yards per game. He usually gives you about 8 targets every week. So as long as he's healthy, as long as he is active with that hip injury, I would still start him. He's earned your trust this season. Kirk Cousins sends him the ball pretty consistently. So love the floor with London. The ceiling's always there. And against the Saints with no Marshawn Lattimore, I have no concerns. This would have been a slight downgrade of a matchup because of the Lattimore coverage. But if you remove that from the equation, he probably scores a touchdown. And if you look at the last 5 games he's played against the Saints, he does average 85 yards on about 9.2 targets, and only one of them was with Kirk Cousins at quarterback. So I'm definitely trusting London. As long as he's available, the floor will be good for at least 12 points, even without a touchdown. So definitely going to start him, definitely trusting Drake London this week. And number 12 and 13, I got Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp at home versus the Dolphins, and this is a primetime game on Monday night. I think they will play very well. Their offense should put up 30+ points against the Dolphins, but Puka has not played a full game this season. He has a maximum of 57% of snaps in all 3 games that he started. Last week he got ejected because he threw a punch, and that's probably not going to happen again. I hope not. That would really suck. And if it doesn't, then there's no reason to be concerned. So we started him last week. He burned you, but the process was correct. I'm going to keep him in my lineup. I'm definitely not panicking because he didn't finish the game. So he will finish this one, and he's probably due for a touchdown at this point. He's their alpha, and he will see the most targets in this offense. But Cooper Kupp has a pretty legit role right behind him. He's been really good this season, averaging 14.8 points per game, and touchdowns are a bit safer with Kupp this season. So I still view him as a very valuable piece, definitely with all the injuries and buys this week. I think both are top 15 options, but Puka gets the Jalen Ramsey coverage, so the touchdown probably is a bit more likely to go to Cooper Kupp. If one gets a slight downgrade, it would be Puka. Although Ramsey has gotten burned this season and the last couple years, he still is somewhat formidable, still a decent matchup that you usually do downgrade the opponent in a little bit. So Puka at 12, Kupp at 13, definitely starting both, but I don't think either is top 10. Number 14, I got Deebo Samuel at Tampa Bay, who is questionable, but I do expect him to play. They're off the bye, and he should be fine. Deebo has been banged up a lot this season, though. And with the bye, I'm happy he gets the rest because that pneumonia is definitely behind him at this point. So along with Christian McCaffrey back on the field, I think there will be a lot of open space for Deebo, more than typical. That should take some focus away from him from the defense. But you know he's their best weapon. He's still going to get plenty, and he still should play well as long as he's healthy. So with more room to breathe, I'd trust his floor. He's been a bit up and down this season, but the touchdown probably gets back to him. I think against Tampa in an elite matchup, it ranks top 3. I would trust Deebo as a must start. Definitely a top 15 option because the Bucs can't stop anyone. In the last 5 games, they allow 37 points per game, 14 catches per game, 186 yards per game, and 9 touchdowns to receivers in that sample size. So Deebo should go off. I definitely trust him. I think he has a very good game this week as the number 1 receiver in San Francisco. Number 15, I got Malik Nabers at Carolina, who's still getting a shit ton of volume, 11.8 targets per game for Nabers the last 4 weeks, but not a single touchdown. That's been capping his upside, but 8 catches, 71 yards. His floor is 11 points, so you cannot bench him. He is bust-proof, and in this matchup against the Panthers, it's definitely a lot better than it has been in the past. He's gotten some tough matchups lately, and I do think this is a spot for him to bounce back in Germany in a standalone game. One of their few primetime matchups, technically primetime, not quite. There will be some people sleeping through this matchup, like probably me on the West Coast. But if you get 11 targets from Nabers against the Panthers, he should go off. He should have a great game. I think he probably goes over 100 yards and most likely scores a touchdown. So I kind of feel too low with Nabers at 15, but his track record lately has been a little less desirable with no touchdowns. That is the only concern for Nabers. But the floor is great. Definitely trusting him. Good plus matchup here. A must start this week. At number 16, he's been so good this season. I'm still starting Brian Thomas Jr., the rookie for Jacksonville, versus the Vikings. The matchup is top 2. Last 5 games, the Vikings secondary gives up a ton of yards to receivers, 196 per game with 10 touchdowns last 5 games. 2 receivers, an average of 40 points is available for the Jags receivers this week. But they did play a lot better last week against the Colts, and maybe Brian Flores' defense is getting back on track. But I'm more concerned about this matchup for Trevor Lawrence than Brian Thomas. At worst, there's going to be plenty of garbage time and a lot of heavy passing game script that will help Brian Thomas in the second half and fourth quarter, especially. He's going to pad the stats for sure. There's no way the Jags aren't trailing big time in this game. So I love that for Brian Thomas, but I'm a bit concerned about his injury status because with a chest injury 2 weeks ago, he was expected to miss at least 2 games, and he did play immediately last week. So he's not 100%. That's for sure. It definitely limited him last week. The matchup wasn't great against the Eagles. This week it's far better. So I do think he's getting back on track in this matchup. I do think he probably finds the end zone. He's been money to do it this year, and overall he's been a very, very trustworthy option, a top 10 receiver on the season. So while I do downgrade him, I would like to see him 100% healthy before I rank him top 10 again. The matchup's an upgrade. I think he's healthy enough to be on the field, and that's all I need to know. Give me Brian Thomas as a top 20 receiver. I think he's a must start. At number 16, cannot bench Brian Thomas. Number 17, I also think you should not bench Josh Downs despite a slightly underperforming game. It actually was exactly what I expected, except for the touchdown. He had 9 targets last week, and in 4 games this year with Joe Flacco, that is the minimum target volume for Josh Downs. He's clearly the number 1 receiver. He has overtaken Michael Pittman, and in 4 games with Flacco this season, Downs still gives you 13.7 points per game on just under 10 targets per game, 7.5 catches, 69 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He is wide receiver 12 in points per game with Flacco under center. So I'm not going to panic. Last week, their offense wasn't great, but he still put up 60 yards on 6 catches, 9 targets. That's the floor you're going to get from Downs every week. So I still think he's a must start. I cannot downgrade him just because he didn't find the end zone last week. That happens sometimes, and it looks like he's more of a 50-50 call to score a touchdown, not a 70% bet to do it. So Downs, a little lower ceiling, but still a very good floor. And with Pittman dealing with an injury, I trust Downs like crazy. This game could turn into a shootout potentially, and Downs should get plenty of targets against Buffalo. I think he's a top 20 play. I do recommend Josh Downs once again. Number 18, I got Darnell Mooney at New Orleans, who would move up probably into the top 10 if London is inactive. This matchup does rank top 10 against the Saints, who just traded away Marshon Lattimore, by far their best corner. So have no faith in the Saints defense. They won't stop Mooney. And Mooney's been clearly the number 2 target for Cousins this year. With another down game for Pitts last week, it's been cemented. Mooney is trustworthy no matter what. Cousins loves to throw him the ball. So he's going to get about 7-8 targets every single week. If London's not in the field, it could be more than 10. And the touchdowns are a decent bet for Mooney as well. He's averaging 11.6 points in his last 4 games with 65 yards per game and 2 touchdowns. He's the wide receiver 21 in that span. So love his floor. The upside is good. And against the Saints, they should capitalize, should win comfortably against a bad team. Even though they fired their coach, I have no faith in New Orleans. So definitely give me Darnell Mooney as a must start. He's been lights out this season. Number 19, I got Tank Dell versus Detroit, who's moving back to the number 2 receiver in this offense with Nico Collins back on the field. Tank Dell, not the go-to weapon anymore. But even against the Jets, he did pay off, went over 100 yards last week. No touchdown, but still very impressive game from Tank Dell in a tough matchup. But against Detroit, it's a very easy matchup. Number 6 overall. They give up over 32 points per game to the receiver position. Only 2 touchdowns the last 5 games, but with 213 yards allowed. Tank Dell probably goes over 100 yards if these trends continue. So I trust his floor. I think the value is definitely higher than normal this week. Detroit's a good matchup. I do think he can exploit it. So his average the last 4 weeks is 10.6 points. And even without a touchdown, I think he will come close to double digits as a floor just on yardage. So with no Stephon Diggs, I definitely trust him against the Lions. At number 20, I have Devonta Smith versus Dallas, who might get the start without A.J. Brown again this season. A.J. Brown's not a full guarantee to suit up this week, but he probably does. I'm not counting out A.J. Brown just yet. And Devonta did play well last week, scored a touchdown while A.J. Brown was banged up. So if it happens, you know Devonta is a elite option, definitely a must start. But even with A.J. Brown healthy, I think he's a good top 20 play this week. If you look at his track record the last 4 games against Dallas with A.J. Brown on the team as well, Devonta has 4 touchdowns, averaging 15.7 points per game. He usually scores a touchdown, and with 70 yards per game, the floor's pretty high regardless of that hitting. So I like this spot for Devonta. Maybe Deron Bland does come back for Dallas this week, but I think it's kind of irrelevant, honestly. It's just a question of, will Jalen Hurts get multiple receivers involved? That's the only concern. I'm not convinced that Hurts is good enough to do that consistently week in, week out, but I do think Devontae's played good enough this year for you to trust him. He's averaging 12.1 points the last 4 games. He is wide receiver 17 in points per game. So trusting his floor, the touchdown upside is always pretty high. I think you have to start Devonta no matter what. At 21, I got George Pickens at Washington, who actually gets a terrible matchup. The Commanders now rank as the worst spot to be in, number 32, only giving up 17.2 points per game to opposing receivers in fantasy. Only 115 yards per game, no touchdowns at all over the last 5 weeks. They also just traded for Marshon Lattimore, but he is banged up, not 100%, and they have a divisional game on Thursday versus the Eagles. That game's definitely more important. So I think they could sit Lattimore just to make sure he's healthy. And if that happens, Pickens would catch a break that would help him out a lot. So I don't think it's as bad of a downgrade as you would think, but against the Commanders, it's still not a good spot at all. So while he does have very high upside, a lot of yak potential, that 50-50 ability is too good to ignore. I don't think Pickens is top 20 this week. At number 21, though, he's a very low-end wide receiver 2 still, high-end flex play at worst, still a must-start most likely. He's been good, and with Russell Wilson, the odds of him finding the end zone are a bit higher, but some of his touchdowns with Fields were just called back. So he's been good this year. It's just a question of, will the touchdown actually hit? Without it, I still think he's a top 30 option at the worst. Number 22, I got Davante Adams at Arizona, who gets a pretty solid matchup here. The Cardinals are about league average, so no downgrade whatsoever. And Adams in 3 games with the Jets is giving you just under 9 targets per game, 4.7 catches, 58 yards, and a touchdown last week. His connection with Rodgers has gotten going. 10.2 points per game on average. And week 1 with the Jets was not good. So he's been getting better every single week. They have a long week to rest up here, so he should be just fine. With added practice reps under him, the connection with Rodgers will continue to click. So although I do prefer Garrett Wilson, clearly the better option, I still think Adams is a must start, definitely a safe play. With Lazard on IR and Mike Williams traded to Pittsburgh, the only other threat would be Malachi Corley and Xavier Gipson. Davante Adams will remain on the field unless he comes off with injury. That's the only risk with Adams, his age and injury concerns, but the volume is locked in. Definitely start Adams if you have him. Number 23, I think DeAndre Hopkins is a player you kind of just have to start. Even in a bad matchup here against Patrick Surtain, I still think he's earned your trust. Really good weapon last week for the Chiefs, where Xavier Worthy did prove untrustworthy. Still, that rookie mistakes cropped up, and the veteran Hopkins got going pretty quickly. It's not a surprise that Mahomes has a good connection with him, only in 2 games so far. So it's only going to get better. Rain probably isn't a factor this week, and although Surtain is a big downgrade, I still think the volume carries Hopkins to a decent floor. He should be fine and probably scores a touchdown. Most likely Hopkins is still a good flex play. So in 2 games with the Chiefs, averaging 14.3 points per game already, only 6 targets that will go up. I love Hopkins' upside, and if you look at last week against Zay Flowers, Surtain did not shut him down at all. Flowers still went over 100 yards. So it's definitely possible that Hopkins still puts up top 10 numbers. I wouldn't rule it out. At 23, I still think you're starting DeAndre Hopkins. At 24, I still think you're starting DJ Moore versus the Patriots, but oh God, it's so annoying. This Bears offense is so frustrating. Even their defense is frustrating. But there were times when DJ Moore gave up on the play last week. He looked very disengaged, and I hate his body language. When he's not happy, you can tell the look on his face is just so deflated. It's really not helpful at all. So I am pretty pissed with him as someone who has him on one of my teams that's having a hard time getting wins lately. I do not trust DJ Moore at all. He is very annoying. Definitely been fading lately. The last 4 games, he has less targets than Keenan Allen, less yards than Rome Odunze, and is barely clinging to 9.7 points per game because of 2 touchdowns. Without it, you're barely getting 6.5 points per game. So I don't trust him. I got a bad feeling about this team rest of season, honestly, and I think they should have traded Keenan Allen while they could before the deadline. I think he's clogging up their offense, and he's only on a 1-year deal. I don't understand why they felt the need to keep him on the roster. So Caleb is just not good enough to keep all 3 players involved every week. So DJ Moore has some value, probably the most starting value of the 3, but he also comes with high burn risk, and now he's just a flex play going forward. I'm not totally sure who is actually the top receiver for the Bears on a weekly basis. So if Kmet has a good game, then all bets are off. There is no safety net at all in Chicago anymore. But given his contract, given his talent, and the likelihood he sees the most targets, I still have him in the flex conversation at 24. Odds are you're still starting him, but if the position was not so decimated, I don't think he would crack the top 30 at all. Number 25, I have Ladd McConkey versus Tennessee, who is still a slight risk in this offense. It's not always guaranteed, but he didn't score a touchdown last week, but was still the number 1 target with 7 targets. McConkey is the most consistent option in the Chargers passing rotation. So I definitely trust him the most. He's my number 1 receiver in the Chargers offense. And in his last 4 games with 2 touchdowns, he is averaging 12.1 points per game. But both touchdowns came in the same matchup 2 weeks ago, and without it, you are not getting the same type of production. But 60 yards is kind of like guaranteed at this point. He is getting 7 targets, 5 catches, 60 plus yards almost every single week. So I do trust McConkey from a floor standpoint. The matchup's not great. It's bottom 6 against the Titans, but L'Jarius Sneed has been banged up lately, has missed some time. He's not a safe play to start. So if I'm trusting anyone of the Chargers receivers, it would be Ladd. And although Quentin Johnston usually scores more touchdowns, it could easily rotate to Josh Palmer at any point in time. So with most volume going his direction, I think he's the safest bet. I still think he's a good play. At 25, I am recommending you have him in your lineup. A good flex this week. I think he will go over 10 points. Number 26, I have Michael Pittman versus Buffalo, who is not a safe bet to actually play. He did not practice on Wednesday, so monitor his status. He's not a lock to suit up, and obviously you're benching him if inactive, but I do think he's still worth starting. In his last 4 games with Joe Flacco, an average of 9.9 points per game on 6.5 targets, 3.8 catches, 50 yards per game, and 2 touchdowns. That is good for about 10 points on average. So he's still okay, but more of a flex option. He's clearly behind Josh Downs in the target share. Flacco prefers Downs a lot more. So I deserve to take an L on Pittman. Last week I was way too high on him. I apologize for the top 12 endorsement, but he has played very well with Flacco, and the stats are still pretty good. I still think he's still worth start consideration, but they do kind of all hinge on one good game and touchdowns when it comes to these stats. So I'm a little concerned. He could be a very risky option. I don't think he's a must start, but as long as he's active, he should bounce back. I do think their offense looks a lot better. Against Buffalo, there is some shootout potential in this matchup. So I'm still going to roll him out there, but at number 26, just a flex option. You don't have to. I'd rather go with any running back I rank inside the top 28. Number 27, I do have Khalil Shakir at Indianapolis, who's still getting consistent targets from Josh Allen, but he's a bit of a check down Charlie. The air yards are not quite there for Shakir, but being the safety valve in Buffalo is not a bad thing. It's definitely a valuable asset to have, and I will keep him here in the flex conversation. Even if Amari Cooper is healthy, I do think Shakir is a weekly top 30 option every single week. So safe flex play. He doesn't have a single touchdown the last 4 games, but is still averaging 9.1 points. That's a very high floor. I do think Shakir is bust proof this week. At number 28, I have Marvin Harrison Jr. versus the Jets, who is not quite bust proof. There are some big volatile games from Marvin Harrison. He either goes over 100 yards and a touchdown or gives you less than like 35, and maybe the touchdown hits, but it's not a guarantee at all. He also fumbled last week. That was brutal. So only an average of 7.4 points per game in his last 4. He is not a safe bet. Any given week, he could burn you with less than 20 yards. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen. It's a tough matchup, bottom 5 against the Jets. But last week, Sauce Gardner did give up over 100 yards to Tank Dell. So it is possible he's perfectly fine. I'm not going to completely overreact. I still think he's a top 30 play, but you know he's volatile. You know he's risky. And if it doesn't hit, you won't be that shocked. So he's not the best bet at 28. You're just trusting his talent. He could go over 20 points and you wouldn't be surprised, but less than 5 also would not be that shocking. So good luck. I think you're going to need it. Harrison is just a risky flex play at this point. I'd rather take the guaranteed 9 points with Khalil Shakir. At 29, I got Jameson Williams at Houston, who is also a very high boom-bust option. When JMO plays poorly, it's essentially a bagel, but he has premier speed. When he hits, it's usually a deep touchdown, and you can get 12 points on just one play from JMO. So that type of player becomes very valuable and is still worth start consideration, but obviously the risk is something to balance. And in a top 10 matchup, I'm willing to endorse it. The Texans have allowed 8 receiver touchdowns in the last 5 games. But with the last 2 games missed due to suspension, he should be fresh, fully rested, and his speed should be on display. You know for a fact that he will be performing at an enhanced rate because he is officially performance enhanced. That's why he was suspended in the first place. So if you were questioning how legit his early season success was, now we know the reason why, and I kind of don't care. I think he will play well, and I do think this is a game where his ceiling is unlocked, could be a high shootout against the Texans. So I think JMO's a good start this week, but just like Marvin Harrison, you could get burned and not be surprised at all with JMO. Number 30, I got Jauan Jennings at Tampa Bay, who is questionable, did miss the game before their bye last week. But assuming he's healthy, he gets a top 3 matchup here, and he should exploit it because he is a go-to target for Purdy when healthy. In his last 4 games, Jennings is averaging 14.3 points per game, but obviously it is skewed by that 3-touchdown game against the Rams. But I think he should be fine. Definitely the number 2 target. As long as he's healthy, I do think he's still better than Ricky Pearsall and does fill in as the Ayuk replacement in this offense. So I do trust the volume for him. I think he'll be fine. And against Tampa, he should play well. The Bucks give up 37 points per game to opposing receivers, an average of 186 yards per game, and 9 receiver touchdowns the last 5 weeks. So love this matchup. Definitely a good spot. Jennings is a high upside play, but because we haven't seen him healthy for a while, there's a little bit of risk involved. I think it should be fine. With McCaffrey on the field, their offense will get rolling. So Jennings, not a bad bet, but obviously it could pivot to Pearsall. He's a first-round pick, and until we see Jennings and him on the field together, I don't know exactly what you're going to get. So I think he's the number 2 guy, but until we know for sure, a little risky at number 30. Not a guarantee must start in your lineup, but a decent high-end flex play. There's a lot of upside in this matchup. At number 31, I got Calvin Ridley at the Chargers, who is not a safe player. While he is getting 10 targets per game the last 4 games, only catching 4.5 catches per game. That is a terrible catch percentage. Less than 50% is disgusting. He has no touchdowns last 4 games, but 1 fumble as well. And 68 yards is the only saving grace with Ridley. So good luck. I don't expect a high ceiling. The matchup is bottom 12 against the Chargers as well. But if he gets 10 to 12 targets, yeah, I guess you're going to start him. If half of them are uncatchable, though, what value does that really offer? A decent floor play, but nothing else. Ridley is not a player you have to start. At this point, I think I'm benching most of these receivers. I would much rather pivot to running back inside the top 30. Number 32, I have Courtland Sutton at the Chiefs, who did go over 100 yards for the second straight game last week against Baltimore. But against the Chiefs, I have no desire to test Trent McDuffie. The Chiefs always lock up number 1 receivers, and they only give up 100 yards per game to the position. But 5 touchdowns in the last 5 weeks means maybe he finds the end zone. That's the only saving grace here, why he could bail you out. He has 2 touchdowns in his last 2 games against the Chiefs as well. That was last year with Russell Wilson, though, at quarterback. You know, Russ sent him a lot more touchdowns than Nix is able to do this season. So I do worry about it. In his last 5 games overall, without the touchdowns, Sutton has been terrible. He is averaging 2.6 catches for 29 yards. He has failed to go over 50 yards in all 5 of those games. So the Chiefs will shut him down. But if you want to bet on that touchdown, it's not the worst bet to make. And in his last 4 games, Sutton is averaging 10.8, but he does have a bagel 3 weeks ago. So he's played well the last 2 games. He is getting a lot of targets, at least 10 from Bo Nix the last 2 weeks. And he also did throw a touchdown last week as well. So there's a chance he puts up good numbers, but against the Chiefs, I'd rather not test it. I think Sutton is worth benching in the same class as Ridley, but with Ridley, you're getting yards and no touchdowns. With Sutton, I think this week you're getting very few yards, but maybe that touchdown does hit. Good luck if you're going to start Sutton. You're going to need it. That's for sure. Number 33, I have Quentin Johnston versus the Titans, and in his last 4 games, he does have 2 touchdowns, about 50 yards per game. He's not a bad bet, in all honesty, but the matchup does rank bottom 7. This is not the best spot. The Titans only give up 91 yards per game to the position, but 5 touchdowns last 5 games. That's what you're hoping for with QJ, and that's kind of the only reason to start him. You're just hoping for a touchdown. He does not give you consistent volume. It's definitely McConkey who offers more of that, but the touchdowns have been hitting a bit more often for QJ this season. He's still athletic. If he does catch it and he gets some space, he can burn you. He's very fast. That is an advantage if it works in his favor. So there's some upside. We saw last week he could definitely pay off, but I think he's just a depth piece at this point. I think you have to be desperate to start him. I'd rather keep him on the bench. Receiver is pretty thin this week. Number 34, I have Rome Odunze versus the Patriots, and Odunze has actually looked like the best player they have over the last 2 weeks, at least at receiver. He's been the most consistent, definitely the most hungry of the 3. He has the most yards, but no touchdowns. It's been a while, but he does have 2 games this year with over 100 yards. One of them just happened against Arizona. So I do think he's better than Keenan Allen. I do think he's starting to step his game up, but I don't quite trust him. This offense is just not good enough to keep multiple receivers viable. And if Cole Kmet gets back on track, all bets are out the window. So I worry about it quite a bit, but the floor has been good for about 8 points. That's what he's offered the last 4 games. Even without a touchdown, 60 yards should be guaranteed. So Odunze is a decent floor play, just like Calvin Ridley. I think you get a safe 8 points from Odunze, but I'd probably just rather start a running back. The odds that they score a touchdown are much higher. So Rome, not a safe bet, a very low in flex play. Probably keep him on the bench in this matchup. Number 35, I got Keon Coleman at the Colts, who did bust last week, but is dealing with a wrist injury. He is not practicing on Wednesday, and that was a big reason why he underperformed last week. So not a safe bet to play at the moment. I might take him out of the ranks entirely by Saturday, but if he does suit up, there is a lot of upside. He can go off for over 100 yards or score a touchdown. That's what he's done the previous 2 games. Prior to last week, he did get 7 targets in each of those games with Amari Cooper on the field. So I do think he's a good flex play, definitely not a bad one, but his wrist injury is concerning, and that could keep him off the field. That is the risk with Coleman. But if he's healthy, I'd probably bump him up a little bit closer to Khalil Shakir if I knew he would play. Number 36, I have Xavier Worthy versus Denver, who put up negative points last week, negative 10 yards total, even worse than a bagel. But if he doesn't step out of bounds and he actually scores that 20-yard touchdown, then all is forgiven. And we know he's risky. That's kind of just the name of the game with this rookie player. The targets did dry up quickly, though, now that Hopkins appears to be safer in this offense. So he was getting 8 targets per game the previous 2 games after the bye, but only 2 last week. Very concerning. If the volume's not there, he is a liability every week. So with Kelsey appearing to be back now, Hopkins looking like the number 1 target, I have a hard time trusting him, but we know the upside is high. He could always flash that speed and score from anywhere. So that's all you're hoping for with Worthy at number 36. I'd probably bench him this week, but it's not the worst bet. You know what you're getting with Worthy. If he burns you, you're not surprised. At 37, I got Xavier Legette versus the Giants in Munich. This rookie could score a touchdown. There's a chance this game actually does get more high scoring than the average Panthers-Giants game normally would. So it's fun to see his horseback riding touchdown celebration. That's kind of the only reason to start him, though. Without it, you're only getting 26 yards per game, and that is brutal. So very touchdown dependent. Legette is a risky play for sure, but with no other players in this offense to really trust, if anyone's catching a touchdown, it would be him. I have no faith otherwise, other than Jatavian Sanders. No one's a threat at all. So Legette, not the worst bet. He has 3 touchdowns last 4 games. It could happen again. Wouldn't be shocked at all to see it happen. Without it, you will not get 5 points, though. Very risky with Legette. Number 38, I have Jordan Addison at Jacksonville, who's also pretty risky as well. Just like Legette, only seeing 5 targets per game this season. He's a bit more efficient in terms of yards, but only 1 touchdown the last 4 games. Without it, you are getting burned for about 6 points on average. So not safe at all. While he did score a touchdown last week, still only 5 targets again. In week 9, it was exactly what you should expect from Addison. 5 targets. If he catches all of them, maybe you'll get a touchdown, but without it, you are kind of screwed and pretty much fucked. So I don't love starting Addison. It's a very risky endeavor, but the upside is definitely available. It's clear he has talent. I just don't think Darnold is capable of getting him the ball at the rate we saw Cousins was able to do last season. So I just don't trust anyone beyond Justin Jefferson and Aaron Jones in this offense. I'd rather bench Addison if I can. At 39, I got Jalen Tolbert versus Philly, who I think I would still bench this week, but does have some upside, does have 2 touchdowns the last 4 games, and usually offers about 50 yards per game. So if the touchdown hits, you'll be happy. Without it, you'll be screwed. And the Eagles are a tough matchup lately. I'm not dying to test it with Tolbert this week, especially with Cooper Rush at quarterback. I don't trust multiple receivers to pay off. So only CeeDee Lamb and Ferguson I think are worth starting this week. No thank you with Tolbert. With the backup quarterback, I will pass. In this matchup, it's not great. Number 40, I got Jaylen Waddle at the Rams, who I want to believe he'll be good again this year, but I have no confidence I can predict when it will happen. Unless Tyreek gets hurt, I just don't trust the volume to go towards Waddle at a high rate, not high enough to keep him viable every week. So while he did score a touchdown last week, he also had negative 4 yards on only 2 catches, 2 targets, and that's a massive red flag. even with a touchdown, you did not go over 7 points. So no thank you. I'm not excited about it at all. And I just have no faith in him. I have no trust with Waddle's target share. So as soon as I rank him outside the top 40, I'm probably going to look stupid. He probably puts up 120 yards and a touchdown. So I still keep him at number 40 for that reason. There's still some talent with Waddle. I have not given up complete faith. I just have no trust. And that's why I'm telling you to bench him. Number 41 is Ricky Pearsall at Tampa Bay, who did play pretty well last time we saw him, but Jauan Jennings was not on the field. So not quite sure what you're getting exactly from Pearsall. While I do think he's better than Jacob Coing, I have no idea what his role is in this offense. So I need to see it before I trust him, but there is a world where he's more valuable than Jauan Jennings. He's a first-round pick after all, and he's talented. He could get very heavily targeted. Off the bye, he did practice a lot more with Brock Purdy, and that chemistry will develop over time. So he'll get better every single week. For now, I think I do prefer Jauan Jennings, a veteran we've seen perform more consistently, a longer track record of success with Jennings. So that's why Pearsall is my least preferred receiver in San Francisco this week. But the matchup's top 3, there's definitely some upside here. I could see Pearsall playing very well given his talent. I wouldn't write him off completely. I'd like to have him on the bench because he does have league-winning upside. Now that Ayuk is gone, rookie receivers usually shine in the back half of the year. Number 42, I have DeMarcus Robinson versus Miami, and I'm tempted to rank him legitimately top 25 because that's what he's been. He's actually been top 15 the last 4 games. He has 5 touchdowns, and although only 5 targets, 3 catches, 42 yards, that's good for 13.2 points. The touchdowns have been hitting. He has 4 touchdowns the last 2 games, and Puka and Kupp have started both of them. So maybe it's just the fact that Puka cannot stay on the field. That's why Stafford is targeting DeMarcus Robinson. But last year, DeMarcus also scored a lot of touchdowns as the number 3 receiver as well. So it's not a fluke. It is legit. And I could be ranking him far too low at number 42. I kind of feel like he's as equally valuable as Jauan Jennings this week, my wide receiver 30. So this tier of flex plays is all kind of the same. And while the floor is non-existent with DeMarcus, the upside is legitimately 20 points. If he gives you another 2 touchdowns, then you will regret not picking him up. DeMarcus, I kind of want to trust. I drafted him like crazy on Underdog this offseason, hoping for this type of upside, and it is hitting. It hit last season. So 13 points is possibly what you're going to get, but the odds it happens are just so low, so slim, and unlikely. At number 42, I doubt you're actually going to start him. Number 43, I have Cedrick Wilson versus the Falcons, who is now the de facto number 1 receiver in the Saints offense. With no Shaheed and Bub Means also going on IR with Olave dealing with a concussion, I do expect Wilson to see the most targets in this offense. And in week 7, that was the case for him as well. He had 7 targets, 6 catches, 57 yards, and a touchdown, 14.7 points in week 7. So it's not impossible for him to play well. He was actually pretty good when he was a Dallas Cowboy like 3 years ago, but he's been pretty irrelevant ever since he left and went to Miami. So now he's with the Saints. We'll see what happens. There should be some volume available, but at this point, what are you really getting from him? I have no faith in Derek Carr, honestly. And it's just volume. That's the only reason to even consider picking him up. But it's only 1 week of value. Olave should be back pretty soon. And I just don't trust Wilson. Without a touchdown, you will not go over 8 points. So no thank you. I'm going to pass at 43, just like DeMarcus Robinson. The risk is too high despite some upside. Number 44, I have Keenan Allen versus New England, who actually has the most targets of the 3 Bears receivers over the last month. That is in his favor, but he also has the least catches of the 3 as well as yards. He's not productive at all despite the volume. His success is just clinging to a 2 touchdown game in London, and 8.5 points per game is pretty misleading in terms of average from Keenan. So I don't trust him at all. I really don't expect multiple Bears receivers to pay off. So he's the last one I want to start. I really think they should have traded him at the deadline. He's on a 1-year deal and he's kind of just clogging up their offense. I think they should have gotten something in exchange for him and salvaged his season and the other receivers. So I might be biased. I'm not happy with Keenan this year, and I think he's been a big disappointment. I was someone who had very low expectations for him entering the year. I told you not to draft him at all. So not excited at all. I have no faith in Keenan. No thank you. But just when I write him off, that's probably the game where he shows up. Number 45, I got Josh Palmer versus Tennessee, who is the number 3 target with DJ Chark also entering the mix. It is a bit crowded. The touchdowns hitting is a bit random in this offense. It did hit last week, but it's not a safe bet at all. So I'm going to pass on Palmer. You are just hoping to get lucky if you start him. At number 46, I think you're also hoping that the luck continues with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine at the Chargers, but just like DeMarcus Robinson, maybe this is the player to bet on. He has 4 straight games with a touchdown in all of them. 4 back-to-back-to-back-to-back touchdowns for Westbrook-Ikhine. Shocking to see. The volume is pretty low without it. You are getting very limited production, but that touchdown has equaled 6 points every single week. That's an average of 10 points per game from Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. So someone other than Ridley has to get some type of volume, and it looks like in the red zone, they do look to him. Ridley has not scored, but Westbrook is pretty much guaranteed to score himself. So that's what you're hoping for. Probably now that we know about it and are willing to trust it, it probably evaporates and burns you. I would rather not chase this type of player, but it's not the worst bet to make. 5 straight touchdowns is possible. He would be on par with Amon-Ra St. Brown if that happened. Number 47, I have Mike Williams at Washington, now a Pittsburgh Steeler, and I do think Russ can make him look a little more decent right away, honestly. I think his skill set is something that they were lacking, so it could pay off. If he can figure out the offense and get up to speed pretty quickly, then maybe he's a good depth piece to have rest of season, but at this point, I'm not quite ready to pick him up off the wire. 48, I have Rashad Bateman versus the Bengals, and with Deontay Johnson in the mix, it just makes them all so random. Other than Flowers, I have no desire to start a second Ravens receiver, but 4 targets did come back to Bateman last week. We know those are going to be deep targets, so if one hits down the field, he could be worth starting. It's a pretty big gamble, though I'd rather avoid it if I can. At 49, I'd also rather avoid Andre Yoshivas versus Las Vegas. He has scored 3 touchdowns in the 4 games without T. Higgins, but only 1.5 catch for 11 yards per game. Without it, you're getting nothing from Yoshi. So I don't want to trust him. The touchdown could hit against the Ravens. It is the best matchup possible, so not a bad bet at all. But without the touchdown, you're not even getting 10 yards. I'd rather skip out on Yoshi. I'm also going to skip out on Malachi Corley at Arizona, but they did trade away Mike Williams and Lazard is on IR. So beyond Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson, Malachi Corley is the number 3 target now, and if he gets rolling, we saw what could happen last week. As long as he doesn't fumble on the goal line, we could see a breakaway touchdown from him. There's been a lot of random touchdown production in the Jets offense this year, random names we're not expecting. It could be Corley once again. I think he has just as high of an upside as a guy like Lazard did when healthy. So it could be a good game. It could happen, but odds are you're not going to trust it. I'd probably keep him on the waiver wire. But I will mention these last 10 players in my rankings. I have Demario Douglas at Chicago. Bad matchup, but he is the number 1 target in the Patriots offense, so that's something. I'm not going to test it. Slayton at Carolina. You're hoping for some deep shots to hit. I doubt it, but good luck there. Ray McLeod did score a touchdown last week, but the volume is not safe. Only if London is ruled out would I consider him. At 54, I have Alec Pierce versus the Bills, and you know exactly what you're getting if you actually decide to pick him up. You're just hoping for that deep touchdown, but if Pittman does not play, Pierce is a bit more interesting, that's for sure. At 55, I have Calvin Austin at Washington, who has averaged 5.7 points the last 4 games, not including return yards, but with Mike Williams added to the mix, he's less safe. His speed is still a bit interesting, though. He could break one, just like Alec Pierce. 56, I got Kayshon Boutte, who's actually the de facto number 2 target with Drake May. That is something, but not ready to trust him at all. Number 57, Wan'Dale Robinson, just a low-end, very short depth of target option. Only in full PPR would I consider Wan'Dale at this point. 58, Parker Washington, the number 2 receiver in the Jags offense. Safer than Gabe Davis, but not safe enough. Even in a good match against the Vikings, no thank you. 59, Michael Wilson versus the Jets, just hoping for a touchdown. And same with Deontay Johnson, but a bagel last week really makes him untrustworthy. I have no idea what you're getting from Deontay if he gets a single target at all. So those are my receiver rankings this week. Very ugly position in week 10. I think you should be very grateful if you have 3 top 30 receivers in these ranks. I think receiver is very, very disgusting this week. And if you can pivot to a top 30 running back outside the top 30 at receiver, I'd rather just do that. I think running back is way, way safer in week 10. So not expecting much. I think the top 7 are definitely locks in your lineup, should go over 18, 20 points. That's the expectation for them every single week. But with Zay Flowers at number 8 all the way through Tank Dell at number 19, I think those are the safe wide receiver 2s this week that should pay off. Even Devonta Smith probably lumped in to that group, but he's kind of the pivot to the flex conversation for me. I think number 20 through 29 are the flex receivers for me. The last guys I'm like trying to start. You're hopeful for a touchdown, but even without it, you probably get a good solid game that's at least 9, 8 points banked no matter what. So those are the decent plays, starting with Jauan Jennings at number 30. I think you're just gambling at that point and really hoping for the best. It gets very, very tricky outside the top 30 at wide receiver in week 10. So that's probably where I'm going to start benching players, but definitely the cutoff point would be Jalen Tolbert. At that point, I think I've lost most of my faith, and I might as well swing for the fence with a guy like DeMarcus Robinson and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, hoping for a touchdown. Without it, you will get burned. So good luck to you. If you still have any questions, let me know in the comment section down below. But that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.